Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Harrington, and today I need to share something with you that could literally save your mind. What I'm about to tell you might seem impossible, but after 30 years in medicine, I've seen this pattern so many times that I can no longer stay silent. There's a simple symptom that most seniors experience every single day, something so common that they dismiss it as just getting older. But what they don't realize is that this seemingly innocent sign could be their brain's desperate cry for help, a warning that dementia is silently taking hold months or even years before any memory problems appear. I'm talking about mouth dryness, and I know what you're thinking. How could something as simple as a dry mouth possibly be connected to something as serious as dementia? Well, the connection is not only real, it's profound, and understanding it could be the key to protecting your cognitive future. Let me start by painting you a picture. Margaret Thompson, an 81-year-old retired nurse, came to see me last winter, complaining about her constant dry mouth. She'd been suffering for 8 months straight, trying everything from special lozenges to prescription mouth rinses. Nothing seemed to work. Her family kept telling her it was normal aging, maybe a side effect of her blood pressure medication. But Margaret insisted something didn't feel right. She'd wake up every morning with her mouth feeling like cotton, and no amount of water seemed to help. She'd started carrying water bottles everywhere and had developed a habit of constantly wetting her lips. What Margaret's family didn't know was that her persistent dry mouth was actually her brain sending out an incredibly early warning signal. You see, what most people don't understand is that our mouth isn't just about eating and speaking. It's actually a sophisticated diagnostic window into what's happening throughout our entire body, especially our brain. The connection between mouth dryness and dementia isn't some new theory. It's based on solid, peer-reviewed research that's been quietly building for over a decade. And here's what's truly remarkable. This isn't just correlation. We now understand the precise neurobiological mechanisms that link your saliva production to your cognitive function. And that knowledge gives us a remarkable opportunity for early detection and intervention. Here's what's happening deep inside your brain when this degenerative process begins. Your brain relies on an incredibly complex network of specialized cells called neurons, and these neurons communicate with each other through chemical messengers called neurotransmitters. And one of the most critical of these messengers is a compound called acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is absolutely fascinating because it serves a dual purpose that's unique in the human body. It's crucial for cognitive functions like memory formation, attention, and learning. But simultaneously, it controls autonomic functions including saliva production. This double duty is what creates the connection between dry mouth and cognitive decline. When the brain regions responsible for producing acetylcholine begin to deteriorate, as they do in the earliest stages of Alzheimer's disease and related forms of dementia, two interconnected problems emerge simultaneously. First, cognitive function begins to decline, but in a manner so subtle that it often goes unnoticed by families, patients, and even standard cognitive screening tests. Second, and this is the key insight that could transform how we approach early detection, the ability to produce adequate saliva becomes impaired. This isn't just a theoretical construct based on laboratory models. A groundbreaking cohort study published in the Journal of the American Geriatric Society followed over 4,800 seniors for an entire decade. What they discovered is absolutely remarkable. Individuals who reported persistent, unexplained dry mouth symptoms were 47% more likely to develop dementia within that 10-year period. And critically, this remained significant even after the researchers accounted for every potential confounding factor they could identify. Medications, comorbid medical conditions, demographic factors, and even genetic risk factors. This wasn't a fluke or a small effect size. This was a robust, reproducible finding that has been subsequently validated in multiple independent cohorts. Think about the implications of this for a moment. We're talking about nearly a 50% increase in risk for developing dementia, based simply on whether an elderly individual experiences persistent dry mouth. That's not a subtle statistical difference. That's a robust signal that demands our attention. But here's where this becomes even more actionable and hopeful for you and your family. The researchers didn't just discover that any dry mouth increased dementia risk. They found that the specific type and characteristics of dry mouth matter extraordinarily. This distinction is crucial because it allows us to differentiate between ordinary dry mouth, which is incredibly common and usually benign, and the particular pattern of xerostomia that appears to signal early neurodegeneration. The first distinguishing characteristic is persistence and progressive worsening. Ordinary dry mouth typically fluctuates based on factors like hydration levels, medication timing, or environmental conditions. Dementia-associated dry mouth, by contrast, tends to be present from the moment you wake up, persists throughout meals, and remains troublesome even when you've been careful about your fluid intake. More concerningly, it doesn't respond adequately to the usual interventions that address ordinary dry mouth. People develop a notion that they need to constantly increase their water intake, but find that even after drinking substantial amounts, the sensation persists. The second major characteristic is concurrent alterations in taste and olfactory function. This isn't surprising when you understand the anatomy of the chemical senses. The same neural pathways that control saliva production also govern our sense of taste and, to a lesser extent, olfaction. When these pathways become dysfunctional, individuals don't simply lose saliva production in isolation. They lose the rich, integrated sensory experience that makes eating enjoyable and satisfying. Food starts to seem bland, even their real favorites. They might start adding more salt or spices to their meals, trying to compensate for this newly diminished sensory signal. Third, and this is something that patients often don't volunteer, but which becomes obvious when you know what to look for, is the development of compensatory behaviors. These are often unconscious adaptations that individuals develop in response to their persistent dry mouth. They start carrying water bottles constantly, or they develop a habit of frequently moistening their lips, sometimes to the point that they develop irritation or cracking around their mouth. Or more subtly, they might start unconsciously avoiding certain foods that become difficult or uncomfortable to consume. Crackers, dry bread, nuts, or other foods that require substantial chewing. The fourth distinctive characteristic is a circadian temporal pattern. Unlike medication-related dry mouth, which typically corresponds to drug administration timing, and unlike dehydration-related dry mouth, which tends to respond predictably to fluid intake, dementia-associated dry mouth often follows a distinct daily rhythm. It tends to be particularly intense during morning hours, improving variably throughout the day, and often returning with renewed intensity during evening and nighttime hours. This distinctive circadian variation suggests disruption of the underlying biological rhythms that govern neurotransmitter production. Now, I want to emphasize something absolutely critical here. Experiencing dry mouth with these characteristics does not mean you are destined to develop dementia. What it means is that your brain may be sending you an early warning signal, an opportunity to take proactive measures before more severe symptoms emerge. And this, frankly, is a gift. It's an opportunity for early intervention that most cognitive diseases don't provide. But why isn't this information widely known in the medical community? Honestly, it's because our healthcare system has become extraordinarily compartmentalized. Excellence in specialization has unintended consequences. It can cost us a holistic understanding of interconnected problems. Dry mouth is routed to dentists, otolaryngologists, or geriatricians focusing on medication side effects. Cognitive concerns go to neurologists and neuropsychologists. There's often little comprehensive communication between these different specialties. But the human body is an incredibly integrated system, and interdisciplinary discoveries happen when we step back and examine the connections between apparently disparate symptoms. That's exactly what happened with the discovery of this connection. Researchers who approached neurodegenerative disease from a more systemic perspective began to notice relationships that had been in plain sight for decades but simply hadn't been recognized. And over the past 15 years, we've begun to develop a more comprehensive understanding of the underlying neurobiology. The cholinergic system, which encompasses all the neurons and pathways responsible for acetylcholine production and release, isn't confined to a single, isolated brain region. Instead, it's distributed throughout multiple, interconnected neural networks that simultaneously and coordinatedly regulate a diverse array of functions, from high-level cognitive processes like memory, attention, and executive function, to autonomic functions including saliva production, heart rate regulation, and gastrointestinal motility. Let me give you a concrete example that illustrates how this interconnectedness manifests in real patient care. Robert Martinez, a 78-year-old retired electrician, came to my office in early 2024 complaining of persistent dry mouth that had been developing gradually over approximately 10 months. His wife had initially encouraged him to see his primary care physician because she'd observed him drinking water constantly, keeping a glass on his nightstand, and seeming increasingly carried away by what seemed like constant need for oral hydration. During our initial consultation, I asked Robert a series of satellite questions that most general practitioners don't reason to explore, since they seem unrelated to the presenting complaint. Had he detected any changes in his sense of smell? Intriguingly, he confirmed that over the same time period, he'd gradually lost his appreciation for his wife's cooking, and he'd stopped enjoying their evening walks through their flower garden because he could no longer appreciate the aromatic complexity of the blooms. Had he been having trouble finding specific words during conversations? Well, yes, he admitted, but he'd been attributing that to normal aging. He'd been facing difficulty recalling technical terminology for electrical equipment he'd been working with for decades, and sometimes he'd initiate a sentence, then find himself struggling to articulate the specific concept he wanted to convey. Most significantly, had he noticed any alterations in his sleep pattern? Absolutely, he confirmed. He'd been waking up multiple times during each night, initially attributing this to an increased need to urinate, which he assumed was a consequence of drinking water all day in an effort to combat his dry mouth. However, when I solicited more detail, he recognized that frequently he was actually being awakened by the intensity of the dry mouth sensation itself, even during periods when he didn't need to use the bathroom. Now, to a physician who's not familiar with the research I've been discussing, these might appear to be completely unrelated patient complaints. But when you understand the fundamental neuroanatomy of acetylcholine production and distribution, they all comprise a coherent, interconnected pattern pointing towards subtle but progressive changes in the same brain regions that control both cognitive function and saliva production. And critically, any of the brain areas that are typically among the first to show measurable pathological changes in Alzheimer's disease and related forms of dementia are also intimately and intrinsically connected to autonomic functions, including oral secretion. But this is where the story becomes not just informative, but genuinely hopeful. I recommended to Robert that we pursue some comprehensive cognitive assessment, not because I had any particular reason to suspect that he was already developing full-blown dementia, but because I specifically wanted to establish a baseline and determine whether there were any very early, subtle changes that we might be able to address proactively. This approach is absolutely essential because by the time cognitive problems become obvious and apparent to families and standard screening tools, significant, frequently irreversible brain changes have already occurred. It's essentially equivalent to waiting to address hypertension until someone has already suffered a major cardiovascular event, when we should have been focusing on preventive interventions all along. The results of Robert's assessment were incredibly instructive. The testing revealed extremely subtle but measurable changes in his executive function, processing speed, and working memory capacity. Changes so minor and incremental that he hadn't noticed them, his family hadn't detected them, and they certainly wouldn't have been identified by casual conversation or routine office visits. But we detected them early, which meant we were in a position to implement aggressive, evidence-based interventions. We developed a comprehensive brain health protocol for Robert, and I'm going to share the specifics in detail because this is really where the most substantial hope lies. After implementing this protocol consistently for 8 months, not only did Robert's dry mouth improve dramatically, but his cognitive assessment scores actually improved beyond his initial baseline measures. His wife noticed that he seemed more alert, more engaged, and more reminiscent of the man she married. He returned to enjoying substantial meals, redeveloped his appreciation for outdoor walks, and no longer carried water bottles constantly. So what did we do? This is the critical information that everyone needs to have, because it could absolutely change the trajectory of your own or a loved one's cognitive future if you're experiencing any of these warning signs we've discussed. First and foremost, don't ignore or dismiss persistent dry mouth as just a normal consequence of aging. Yes, aging affects saliva production to some degree. Yes, certain commonly prescribed medications, including antihistamines, diuretics, antidepressants, and sedatives, can cause dry mouth as a side effect. Yes, various chronic medical conditions, including diabetes, autoimmune diseases, and radiation exposure, can affect salivary function. But if, after thoroughly evaluating and addressing these more obvious potential causes, the problem persists, it's absolutely essential to explore further. Here's my specific evidence-based approach for anyone experiencing these symptoms, and it's a systematic strategy that you can begin implementing immediately. Start by maintaining a detailed daily log for a minimum of 3 weeks. Instead of focusing exclusively on dry mouth frequency, document when your mouth feels especially dry, but also any fluctuations in food taste, changes in your appreciation for or ability to detect smells, everything you've consumed, any medications you've administered, intensity and duration of sleep, general energy levels, and any difficulties with language, memory, or focus. This approach isn't about developing an obsessive preoccupation with symptoms, but rather gathering objective, systematic data that can illuminate patterns that aren't immediately apparent. Many of my patients are genuinely surprised to discover correlations they had completely failed to recognize. For instance, they discover that their dry mouth is consistently more intense after poor quality sleep, or that there are clear correlations between periods of elevated stress and difficulty concentrating. Pay exceptional attention to concurrent symptoms that may seem completely unconnected, but which may actually indicate shared underlying pathophysiology. For instance, are you experiencing more difficulty identifying specific words during conversation than you used to? Do you find yourself frequently pausing mid-sentence, searching for a specific term or concept that previously would have come to mind effortlessly? Are you having noticeably more difficulty following complex or multi-layered conversations, especially in acoustically challenging environments like restaurants or crowded social gatherings? Do you find yourself either avoiding or feeling unusually confused or overwhelmed in familiar locations? Have you detected any changes in food appeal, taste appreciation, or olfactory perception? These apparently disparate symptoms are potentially components of a unified neurological syndrome. Now let's discuss what you can implement to protect your cognitive function if you're exhibiting any of these symptoms. The most exciting aspect of this research is the demonstrated neuroplasticity of the adult brain. Even in older adults, the brain possesses a remarkable capacity for generating new neural connections when we provide appropriate support. First, address hydration from a neurophysiological perspective. Your brain requires specific electrolytes in precise proportions to function optimally. I recommend incorporating a carefully measured pinch of high-quality sea salt into your daily water intake, or using an electrolyte supplement without artificial sweeteners. The magnesium in quality sea salt supports over 300 enzymatic reactions crucial for neurotransmitter production. Second, implement dietary modifications to optimize brain health, focusing on compounds that support acetylcholine production. Incorporate omega-3 rich foods like wild-caught salmon, sardines, walnuts, and ground flax seeds. Dark leafy greens provide B vitamins essential for neurotransmitter production. Choline-rich foods like eggs deserve special attention since choline is the direct precursor to acetylcholine. Third, implement mechanical stimulation for salivary gland retraining. Chewing sugar-free gum or lozenges with xylitol can stimulate alternative neural pathways for saliva production while avoiding artificial sweeteners that may interfere with neural function. Fourth, address stress management aggressively. Chronic stress triggers cortisol elevation, which impairs saliva production and can reduce brain volume in areas crucial for memory. Simple techniques like breathing exercises, gentle exercise, and meditation can measurably improve both stress hormones and cognitive function. Fifth, optimize sleep quality as a foundation of neural health. Quality sleep allows your brain to clear away toxic protein accumulations associated with dementia. Poor sleep contributes to dry mouth and accelerates the brain changes we're trying to prevent. But here is what I most emphatically want to emphasize. If you're experiencing persistent dry mouth along with any associated symptoms I've described today, don't wait. Early detection and aggressive intervention is absolutely everything when it comes to cognitive health. The degenerative brain changes that eventually manifest as dementia can progress undetected for decades, but they are most responsive to intervention during the earliest stages. And I can testify from my clinical experience that I've personally observed the tragic consequences of families who choose to wait versus the incredible, transformative difference that early detection and intervention can achieve. Patients who catch these early warning signs often maintain their cognitive function for years longer than those who wait for obvious symptoms. The research on this connection continues to evolve, but what we understand is compelling enough that every senior experiencing persistent, unexplained dry mouth deserves comprehensive cognitive evaluation. Not to frighten them, but to empower them with information that could preserve their mind. Your brain is incredibly resilient and capable of healing when given the right support. That persistent dry mouth might just be the early warning that saves your cognitive future. It's not a sentence, it's an opportunity. Take it seriously, act systematically, and remember that every day you take action for your brain health is a day you're investing in your future quality of life. Thank you for watching, and remember, your health is your most valuable asset. Protect it, nurture it, and never ignore the subtle messages your body is trying to send you. If this information has been helpful, please share it with someone you care about. Early awareness could make all the difference. Until next time, this is Dr. Harrington reminding you to listen to your body and never stop fighting for your cognitive health.